Hi everyone, this is Mindy Egan for lawnfawn, and in today's video I'm going to be showing you how I use a cover plate die to create a silhouette scene. The first thing that I'm going to be doing is some ink blending to set my nighttime scene. The colors I'm using are Sugar Cookie, Peacock, and Blue Jay, all inks from lawnfawn. I start with a piece of 80-pound white cardstock cut to 4¼ by 5½, and I'm going to start with Sugar Cookie ink. I'm ink blending this in the middle of the cardstock because that's where I want my highlight area to be, and this can take a little bit of time to really build up that color, or if you don't want to have it be super bright, you can stop a little earlier and have it be just a very faint, soft glow. Next, I'm going to bring in Peacock. And this is really kind of an undercolor that I'm going to put down for my nighttime scene. This is going to go all the way around the edge of the cardstock. And when I blend it towards that sugar cookie ink, I'm trying not to overlap it too much. I really didn't want to have a green hue, which is typically what you're going to get if you have a peacock and a yellow type of ink. So I'm going just kind of barely up to the center part of it. And like I said, this is more of an undercolor, so it's going to be easier to blend on my darkest color, which is going to be the Blue Jay ink. After I have all of the edges covered, I'm going to bring in that Blue Jay ink and go around to those edges once again with a blending brush. Now this one, it would be nice to keep some of that peacock feathers, but if you happen to blend over it with the Blue Jay and cover it up, it's okay because it's still going to have kind of that undertone to it. So I am blending in towards the center. I start off a little heavy-handed on the edges, and then I get lighter-handed with my brush as I get towards the center. Now, in any type of blended background, it's not going to look amazing at first. It's going to kind of look like a mess, but once we start adding in our additional elements, it's really going to come together. This is the Flower Garden backdrop die. I kind of just lined it up to make sure I had enough blue coming in towards the center that it's going to show up in on the card front. So I'm going to take a piece of black licorice cardstock and I'm going to die cut this twice. What I want to do is layer these two pieces up so it's going to add a little bit of stability because with some of those foliage pieces that are popping in, they're I don't want them to be flimsy. I want them to have some stability to them. So once I'm happy with how this is going to look for the front of the card, I can take my liquid glue. I'm going to apply it all around the edges and then adding bits of glue to those foliage pieces so that they don't come up. Then I can line it up over that second frame and just kind of gently shift them until they all line up in place. I am currently working on a media grip mat, I believe it's called, and I like using these a lot of times when I am gluing pieces together because it's a lot easier to clean the liquid glue off of this mat than it is my work surface. Now that that's all glued together, I can start building up my scene. So already, just by adding that pop of black, it's really starting to come together, but I want to add a grassy border. So I placed my die cut frame over my background. I have another piece of white cardstock that I placed right next to it, and I have the grassy border. So I line up about how high I want that to come up from the bottom, and then I just slide that over to the white cardstock, hold that down with a Post-it tape and run that through my die cut machine. So that's going to come up at a pretty decent height. I can always trim off some of the bottom later if I feel like it's too tall. I'm starting with cilantro ink to do my grass, once again just using a blending brush, or you can use a sponge dauber, whatever you're comfortable with. And I'm going to add this over my grassy piece starting at the bottom, and then I'm going to turn this and add it towards the top. I do want to be kind of careful when I come to my grass up there that's sticking up because I don't want to bend the cardstock. So a lot of times I'm going to move my brush kind of up towards the direction of the grass. So I was moving my arm to the right. That's just going to help me avoid bending my cardstock. Then I'm going to come in with artichoke ink. I'm blending that up towards the grass. I'm going to have that be the darkest parts. You probably won't see most of this, but I think it does add a nice hue to it. And I love the artichoke because it kind of gives it that mossy look. Now, this next part is totally optional. I absolutely love adding splatters to practically everything. For this, I'm just going to be using a white acrylic paint that I'm mixing with a couple drops of water, and I'm going to pick that up with a small paintbrush. Now, right off the bat, I saw that I was getting some pretty big splatters, and being that this is a nighttime sky, I wanted them to be a little bit smaller. So something you can do is either grab an acrylic block and flick your paint off of that, or you can grab your craft pick, add a little bit of paint on there, and then flick it off of your craft pick. And that's going to give you a very fine mist of paint. Once I'm happy with that starry background, I'm also going to bring in the grass and I'm going to add some splatters to that as well, mainly because I really like my splatters. I think it just adds a little bit of interest to my pieces. After I'm done with my splatters, I'm going to set these off on the side to dry and I'm going to work on some more die cutting. Here I'm taking the happy mushrooms and I'm going to die cut out the top pieces of the mushroom from chili pepper cardstock and the base piece of the mushroom and also the stems from vanilla malt. I did contemplate the idea of teal colored mushrooms, but my heart was pretty set on red, but I think teal would look really pretty too. Now you may notice here that I did die cut out multiples. So I have two base pieces and the one top piece for both sizes, and then the same thing for their stem. That's totally optional. That is just my personal preference. Again, that is really something I just like to do to add stability behind my pieces. So I want to add some shading to this, and this I'm using walnut ink from lawnfawn and these small blending brushes. I'm adding it to the left-hand side and a little bit underneath these mushroom tops. It's a little hard to take a dark red and add it to dark red cardstock, so that is why I opted to go with a dark brown. I also could have started with a lighter shade of red, and then I could have brought in maybe a cranberry ink to do the shading. So either way would work really well. Now here I'm adding that to that smaller mushroom, and you're gonna notice I have a lot of excess ink on this media grip mat that I'm using to kind of hold my die cuts in place so they're not sliding all over my glass work surface. And what I'm gonna do is just take one of each of my stems, and I'm using the leftover ink that I have on my brush and on my mat to add a little shading to those as well. Or again, we could have gone with maybe a gray instead of the brown. Now with all my shading done and my ink all wiped up, I'm going to take those two base pieces and start putting them together just using my tweezers and my liquid glue. I did that for the top of the mushrooms and also the stems. Then I can add the liquid glue behind my red piece that's going to go right over the top so I have kind of that creamy or off-white color of spots on my mushroom. Same thing for the smaller one. Once those are secured down, I can then put my tops of the mushrooms on top of the stem. And I love this because I can make my mushrooms as tall or as short as I want. So I went probably as high as I could with that piece, and here I just kind of went to the top of that piece as well, but I could have made them smaller. Now this card I'm actually remaking. I had originally done this and I'll include my original picture at the end of the video. And I decided I wanted to add to it. This cute little guy from Bubbles of Joy is kind of looking up and I thought he would be perfect to put on top of my mushrooms. So I stamped him out on just some scratch paper. You can see I used this to do my grass. And it's the 80-pound white cardstock and I stamped the image in the Lawn Fawn Jet Black ink and then coloring in with my Copic markers. The colors I used are E44, E43, and E42. And then I believe I brought in an R21 for the ears, the nose, and a little bit of a pink cheek. After I have him all colored in, I can grab the coordinating die, hold it down with Post-it tape, and die cut my image out. Now I'm going to step up my background just a little bit. The splatters were actually something extra that I added to this card. The original card, I did use this starry sky background, and I'm going to be using the fairy dust paste. I'm going to scoop it out with a palette knife and just start spreading that over the open areas of my stencil. Here, once again, I have that media grip mat that's kind of holding my cardstock in place, and then I can place the stencil over the top and start applying the paste. Now, one thing I really want to tell you about paste is if you have it, use it. Um, Everybody's pastes are great, but they do have a shelf life, and the longevity of your paste can really vary depending where you live, where you have it stored. In my house, I noticed I moved my craft room and things are just acting a little differently in the places that I have them stored. So, really, if you have your paste, use it so it doesn't dry out on you, which is another reason I thought this would be really cool to use in my backdrop because it's sparkly, but also I really want to use the products that I have. So once I was done applying the paste, I set that off on the side to dry. I washed my stencil, and now while that's all drying, I am going to stamp my sentiment. Again, I am using that scratch paper that I die cut that grass from. It's getting a lot of use. There's no waste going on here. And I'm stamping a sentiment from the Happy, Happy, Happy stamp set. So I know it's hard to see on screen right now, but I have a skinny sentiment and then the word happy that I'm going to ink up with the black licorice ink and stamp that down onto the cardstock. One of the reasons I really love this, besides the fact that it's a really happy stamp set, is because it has coordinating dies for the word happy. So I'm using my paper trimmer to trim out the smaller sentiment, and I'm going to trim it into a thin strip. And then I'm going to use the coordinating die to die cut out the word happy. And I also had trimmed out some additional smaller strips, and I die cut out additional happies so that, again, I could layer them up to create the dimension. I do want to have these pop up off the front of the card, and it's a lot easier to just go ahead and die cut out multiples versus trying to trim down your foam strips to add behind it. Before I start attaching anything to the front of my panel, I created a side folding card base. I added tape runner to that, and then I'm placing my ink blended background over the top. It really did not take long for that stencil paste to dry, so I just pushed that down with my hands to secure it in place. Now I'm going to bring in my grass. I added liquid glue to that, and this you're going to need to place something heavy on it, whether it's a couple of acrylic blocks or some books. You want to give that a few minutes to really secure down because our background has that stencil paste over it. For my flower garden frame, I am taking these thin foam strips and I'm going to add them all around the outer edge, but I'm also going to take them and trim some of these foam pieces down and place them in the larger areas of my stems just because I didn't want them to get bent or be flimsy. So just here and there, I added those little bits of foam strips. I'll then bring in my mushrooms and I'm going to put some thin foam squares behind this larger mushroom. I do put 3 on the top and then I have some on the stem. And then I'm going to go ahead, remove the backing of those foam squares and place that onto my card front. Now I don't have my frame attached down just yet. That is just kind of there as a guide. For the smaller mushroom, I added some foam squares just to the right hand side because it's going to overlap my larger mushroom. Now that I'm happy with the placement of the mushrooms and I'm happy with the height in comparison to the frame, I can remove the backing of those foam strips and place this over the top. So it's going to have a nice lift to it. This would also be really great to turn into a shaker card. Then I have my cute little mouse. I added a foam square to the top by his head and then some liquid glue towards the bottom. And he's going to go right on top of that small mushroom and he's looking up. I think that is just absolutely the sweetest. And next I can bring in my sentiment. So I started with the word happy using my liquid glue because it's already built up with that dimension. Again, once you place it down, you're going to want to put something heavy on it and let that sit for a few minutes. Once I am happy with that, I'll go ahead and add that smaller sentiment to the top and again, set something heavy on it for a minute. Now this is perfectly adorable as is, but I'm going to bring in a white gel pen and I'm going to add some highlights to these larger leaves. In my original design, I added it just to the larger leaves, but I decided to go through and add these highlight areas to everything. Maybe I overdid it a little bit, but I think it's really cute to have these black silhouettes with those bright white highlights on the leaves. I think it helps kind of draw your attention to the center of the card. And that is my finished card project for you today. I hope you enjoyed today's inspiration. Thank you so much for joining me.